Picture this. You paid $200,000. Not for a house, not for a business, for a passport. A passport from a tiny island in the Caribbean that you probably only looked into because you wanted visa-free access to Europe. And then, on June 25, 2026, a letter shows up from an EU commissioner. And that letter basically says, you have 24 months. Either you shut the program down, or we shut you out of Europe. And here's the part that actually matters. For the first time ever, the EU doesn't even need to prove anything went wrong. No criminals caught with these passports, no leaks, no investigation needed. The mere existence of the program is now enough of a reason. If you hold a passport from Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, or St. Lucia, or you're even thinking about getting one, stick with me to the end, because we're going to break down what's actually happening, why it's happening right now, and this is the part everyone wants to know. What happens to passports that have already been issued if Brussels follows through? Let's lay out the facts. No hysteria, no clickbait. On June 25th, EU Commissioner for Home Affairs and Migration Magnus Brunner sent formal letters to 5 Caribbean states. People are calling them the Caribbean Five: Antigua and Barbuda, Dominica, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, and St. Lucia. The letter's core demand is simple. The EU wants these countries to fully phase out their citizenship-by-investment program, CBI for short, by June 1, 2028, so roughly 2 years from now. But here's where it gets interesting. By September 2026, just a couple of months from now, the countries need to show interim measures. What kind? Fully exclude anyone under EU sanctions from these programs. And significantly tighten vetting for every applicant, regardless of nationality. Antigua's Prime Minister Gaston Brown publicly confirmed the letter exists and that the demands are exactly what's being reported. And then he added, paraphrasing here, that the program will continue with or without visa-free arrangements. A pretty bold stance for someone whose country pulls a noticeable chunk of its national budget from this program. One important detail almost nobody's talking about: the actual EU letter hasn't been published in full anywhere. What we know comes from Antigua's government describing it. That doesn't make the information unreliable, but it does mean the exact wording, any legal wiggle room, any nuance is coming to us secondhand. Now, why this isn't just another empty threat, but an actual functioning mechanism. On December 30th, 2025, about 6 months before these letters went out, a revised version of the EU's visa suspension mechanism came into force. Here's how it used to work. The EU had to prove concrete harm: rising illegal migration, a spike in crime, security red flags. You needed data. You needed statistics showing something was genuinely wrong. The rules just changed fundamentally. Now, the simple fact that a country sells citizenship to people with no real connection to it, no residency, no social ties, nothing beyond a wire transfer, that alone is enough to trigger suspension proceedings. Which means the old defense, look, our vetting is clean, no criminals, here are the reports, doesn't work anymore. It was never really about who's getting the passport, it's about the model itself. Citizenship in exchange for money, with zero physical presence required. And there's a pretty harsh precedent backing this up. Vanuatu, a small island nation in the Pacific, went through exactly this path. Partial suspension of its visa waiver in 2022, and by December 2024, full and permanent revocation. The EU proved it. They're willing to follow through, even against a small, friendly, relatively harmless country. So these letters to the Caribbean Five aren't diplomatic courtesy. They're a warning shot from an institution that's already pulled the trigger once. Now let's look at how the EU is actually backing this up, and the rejection rate numbers are genuinely revealing. Antigua and Barbuda, roughly 1.5% to 2% rejection rate, meaning almost everyone who applies gets approved. Grenada and Dominica, also low, somewhere around 4 to 5%. St. Lucia, noticeably higher, around 11%. And St. Kitts and Nevis, the strictest of the 5, close to 15% rejections, largely thanks to a structural overhaul they did earlier. From the EU's point of view, a rejection rate that low, at that volume, doesn't look like careful vetting. It looks like a rubber stamp, a passport factory for wealthy people trying to sidestep the normal visa process. And here's the detail that really irritates European officials. Most of these programs don't require any actual residency on the island. The one exception is Antigua, which technically required 5 days of physical presence over 5 years. And even that was apparently widely bypassed. For comparison, citizenship is generally supposed to reflect some real social and physical connection to a state. Here, that connection basically doesn't exist. And here's the thing. The June 25th letter isn't the beginning of the story. It's the final chapter. These countries have been getting boxed in for years, and not just by Europe. Look at the timeline. 2017. Canada revokes visa-free access for Antigua and Barbuda, explicitly citing the risks tied to its investment citizenship program. 2023. The UK imposes visa requirements on Dominica, March 2024. The same thing happens to St. Lucia, June 2024. The Caribbean states themselves, trying to ease the pressure, sign an agreement setting a unified minimum investment floor, $200,000 to $250,000, basically killing off the cheap discount schemes that had been especially irritating to Western partners. January 1st, 2026. The US introduces partial visa restrictions for citizens of these countries, citing a lack of, quote, genuine links to the islands. Early 2026. Ireland fully ends its visa waiver for St. Lucia and St. Kitts and Nevis. And finally, June 25th, the EU ultimatum. So over roughly 9 years, 5 separate Western jurisdictions, Canada, the UK, the US, Ireland, and now the EU, independently arrived at the same conclusion about these programs. Coincidence? Probably not. Now, the part that gets talked about the least, but is arguably the real driver behind all this pressure. The first issue analysts point to is what's sometimes called identity laundering. Someone from a higher risk country, historically parts of the Middle East, Russia, Central Asia have come up, can legally change their name when they acquire Caribbean citizenship. After that, it becomes extremely difficult for Western border systems to link the new passport holder back to their original identity, including, say, any past financial liabilities or red flags. The second issue is the near total absence of any residency requirement. We already touched on this, but it bears repeating. Aside from that formal 5-day stay on Antigua, none of these programs require a person to ever actually set foot on the island. And under the EU's logic, citizenship is supposed to reflect some genuine connection to the state. Put those two things together, and you get exactly what Western intelligence agencies are worried about. Someone whose identity is hard to trace, whose connection to the country that issued them is impossible to verify physically. For a border control system, that's essentially a blind spot. But the Caribbean states have a serious argument of their own, and it's money. Real, substantial money. In several of these countries, revenue from citizenship-by-investment programs makes up 30 to 50% of the entire national budget. That's not an exaggeration. It covers debt servicing, infrastructure, and disaster relief from climate events, which for small island states aren't some abstract risk. They're a regular reality. The Organization of Eastern Caribbean States pushed back hard, calling the EU's demands a direct hit to their economic stability, and essentially issued a counter-demand. If Europe wants us to give up a sovereign revenue stream, Europe needs to offer a full alternative financing framework in return. So the Caribbean negotiating position, roughly translated, is, you want us to kill this program, then compensate us for it. Whether Brussels goes along with that is very much an open question right now. Okay, so what's the actual timeline to watch? September 2026, deadline for interim measures, excluding sanctioned individuals, tightening vetting. December 2026, the European Commission's next report under the visa suspension mechanism. This is the first real decision point. This is where a temporary suspension could actually get triggered, well before the final 2028 deadline. 2027, likely the main negotiation window. The Caribbean states will probably propose things like residency requirements, biometric enrollment, stricter screening, and data sharing with the EU. The problem is, even those reforms might not satisfy the EU's new genuine link standard. June 1st, 2028, the formal deadline for a full phase-out. And the EU still hasn't publicly clarified what happens to passports already issued. Would everyone be affected, including people born on these islands? Or would restrictions only apply to passports issued after a certain date, the way it worked with Vanuatu? Right now, there's no guarantee either way. So, to sum it up, no, visa-free access hasn't been revoked yet. Panic is premature, but the legal mechanism now exists. The precedent is already set, and the pressure is coming from 5 directions at once: Canada, the UK, the US, Ireland, and now the EU. If you're holding one of these passports purely for European travel, it's worth treating visa-free access as conditional and temporary, not as some guaranteed benefit locked in for decades. And if you're curious how alternative citizenship and residency programs actually work, and which of them are holding up better under this kind of pressure, hit like. That tells me this topic's worth digging into, and I'll cover it in the next video. See you then.